Yeah, Erin Miller, everybody.
I should say that I know I'm about 2 weeks too late, but mine is a Halloween story. So mine is a true life ghost story. So it was after midnight when the nun answered our knock on the side door of the old seminary. And the building was old, like old world old. It had been a seminary since the 1800s, but before that it was a monastery built in the 1400s. You know, like when Columbus was sailing to America. And not surprisingly, it was also one of these old school seminaries where the men learned to be priests while there was a whole army of nuns on hand to do the cooking, the cleaning, all the general servitude stuff. Now, normally when one enters a seminary, you would go through the enormous wooden front doors into another enormous courtyard. But because it was so late, and because we were both women, the nun had us go to the side door, and she took us through kind of a shortcut, which took us actually through the nun's private quarters, which was basically a whole bunch of like windy corridors that really felt like secret passageways. And eventually she took us through a one-way locked door and dumped us out into the dorm area. So I was in my mid-20s. I was a grad student in anthropology, and I was about to spend a month in a cave on a field school in Santander, Spain, excavating Paleolithic artifacts, which I can see by your eyes, everyone thinks sounds really cool. And it is, in fact, the most boring, back-breaking work you will ever do in your life. Field schools are actually where undergraduates go to spend a summer getting credits, learning that archaeology has absolutely no similarity to Indiana Jones whatsoever. But they don't find that out until after they're already stuck and committed. But I was not an archaeologist, I was an anthropologist. Specifically, I was a paleoanthropologist, which means I studied dead bodies. Long ago, dead bodies. Now, in the course of my studies, I have spent a lot of time around dead things. I've dissected all kinds of primates, including humans. I've butchered a dead yak. I boiled pig skulls for an experiment. I even got maggots up my nose once, which is another story I tell, which is also oldie but a goodie. I used to work in a lab that had floor-to-ceiling boxes of skeletons, kind of like the final scene in Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, which isn't actually apt archaeology analogy, but that's about it. So I have had a lot of opportunity in my life to feel like creeped out, kind of feel icky about what I'm doing, get kind of that haunted sort of feeling. Never ever happened. I'm just not one to kind of get the heebie-jeebies that way. But back to that night, so spending this month in Spain, I had taken the week before to be a good little anthropology grad student, and I had backpacked in France, visiting every dark, dank grotto you could find if it had the tiniest little bit of Paleolithic art in it, which there's actually a ton of, besides like the big famous ones. But I'd been traveling by bus and by train, and I was super tired when I got to the bus station. As I said, after midnight, my fellow grad student Marcy picked me up and drove us about 15 minutes to the seminary, which was about 2 miles from our cave site, and the seminary made money by providing room and board to itinerant groups like ours. And even though it was my first, and what would prove to be my only year there, Marcy later told me in all the years she'd been staying there, she had never ever once been in the nuns only section of the place. And I sort of always wondered if going through the nuns area kind of like triggered it, or if it was just a weird coincidence. But in any case, we're in the dorm area. I'm given my room, which is about what you would expect for a 500-year-old room. In fact, it was probably about this size, maybe smaller, probably smaller. Stone, had 2 metal narrow beds, a night table in between, a couple of windows on the far wall. I threw my stuff on the ground, I got into bed, passed out asleep, where I slept very soundly for a couple of hours, until I woke up in the middle of the night because there was someone in the room with me. Now, I I was definitely groggy, but I remember very distinctly saying, "Oh, are you my new roommate?" But as I'm coming out of sort of the foggy haze, I realize, well, it's the middle of the night, and my roommate isn't arriving till tomorrow or the next day or whenever, and it's not my roommate, or future roommate, it's a nun. And as again I'm coming out of it, I'm trying to figure out, like, why is there a nun in my room? More importantly, why is she standing on the end of the other bed? And why is she holding her head at a funny angle? And that's when I see the rope. And I realize that there is a nun hanging in the middle of my room. Now, it was dark out, but there were windows that had lights coming in, and this was not like some like ethereal thing. This was like as real a solid a person as any of you guys are. And like, it wasn't even just that I saw her, I felt her. Like, that's what woke me up, was the fact that I felt or could sense or heard or whatever that there was somebody in the room with me. So I'm staring at this hanging nun, and my body is paralyzed with fear. I can't move, but my brain is racing, and my brain is saying, oh my God, take in every single detail because nobody is going to believe this. You have to write this all down. So I like literally start staring at her, and I start staring at her head, and she's wearing one of those like nun headpiece thingy. She's all in black. It's like a skirt below her knees. She's kind of boxy. She's wearing these like black low-heeled leather pumps, and the reason why I remember that is because my eyes are about the same level, because I'm in bed, I'm in bed and it's about the same level as her feet, and they had like these buckles on them covered in the same black fabric, kind of like if you think about nurses' shoes in the 1970s or something like that. I had like this little thing, and I was just staring at her feet for the longest time because the feet disappeared into the middle of the mattress. So I only saw part of the feet. Anyway, I'm staring at this for a while, and then finally, somehow my brain, subconscious, unfreezes because I reach out and I slap the wall and the light flashes on. And the room is suddenly empty. And I immediately turn the light off because I'm like, maybe there was like a shadow on the wall, or something hanging. The room is completely empty, the nun is gone. Well, now I'm not paralyzed with fear anymore. I get up, I run across the hall, I pound on Marcy's door, and I'm like, oh my God, ghost, can't stay there, whatever. And she's just like, okay, crazy lady. So I spent the rest of the night curled up in fetal position in her spare room, totally not sleeping. And so the next morning, she's like, okay, well, could you have been dreaming? Which is obviously the logical explanation. I'm like, well, if I was, I have never woken up. There was no point where I had a wake-up moment from that time on. And we thought, well, let's do some investigating. Then we thought, we're guests here. Nuns have this whole suicide is a mortal sin, probably would not make them happy, and the food is already terrible. So we just moved me into another room, put a couple of guys in that room. The rest of the summer, I never see or hear anything like that, but I cannot sleep unless I'm curled up in fetal position with a flashlight. Always with a flashlight. And now, when I have friends who say, hey, do you want to go to a haunted house or on a ghost walk, or I work on a ghost TV show or whatever, I'm like, been there, done that, none was enough.